Aloha. This video I wanted to just share a little well, I was doing two things. One thing was to share with people this little thread that I just stumbled across, but also to make like a quick video to see the subscriber count, see if the subscriber count can drop below 900 again. It's at 904 now, or 903, or 12,903. It just keeps going. Like these videos keep bringing it down. So I'm like learning it and seeing it. But this video with the synagogue shooting, it's not so much about the video. It's about the little Wikipedia thing that's under there. I was wondering. I was like, what's going on with this? Like, why would YouTube be sharing information that, like, about the government? Like, they usually just you share information to defend the government, right? So and then I was like, oh, maybe they have to do that to make it look like they're like have complete disclosure, or where, what is that word, not disclosure, but when you can see through, full visibility. No, there's another word. Transparency. So yeah, so full, like, to be transparent, I guess that's what YouTube is doing with this. But anyway, I didn't really care too much about that. I wanted to look into what VOA was. I was like, what the hell is VOA? And why is this thing here? So I clicked on the Wikipedia thing. And obviously in here, this video is it's just basically saying, it's just like Trump walking up to there and saying, hey, there was a shooting. And yeah, it was a hate crime. Oh, gosh darn it, guys. There was another hate crime. It's just so surprising. Like, what's going to happen now? So I was like, what the hell? This looks like a little puppet. A little puppet that's walking up to, a big microphone to say something. And that's what it was. So I had a feeling like this is a government funded. I mean, because this same video is obviously on CNN. Excuse me. It's obviously on CNN, but it was this VOA thing was what I wanted to check out. So, and this media that is funded, VOA News, a media agency funded by the American government, and there's a Wikipedia on it. Holy shit, let me check it out. So click on it. Here's the Wikipedia for Voice of America. Voice of America is a government-funded international multimedia agency which serves as the United States federal government's official institution for non-military external broadcasting. Non-military, a government media agency. What kind of non-military external broadcasting? Why would that be? Why would the Voice of America need to be known out there? Well, we don't even need to go through all that. We already know the media. The thing that interested me was a little further down. Obviously, it says, like, it's pretty shocking that it's in 40 languages, in affiliate stations around the globe, primarily viewed by foreign audiences. So a government-funded media agency that's in 40 languages around the world and has been running since 1942. Established in 1942. So this media agency has been running since 1942. And what I wanted to share with people is that it was running right at, where does it say it? The next step was to broadcast to Germany, which was called Stimmen aus Amerika, Voices from America, and was transmitted on February 1st, 1942. The first broadcast, where is it at? Direct programming began a week after the United States' entry into World War II in 1941 with the first broadcast from the San Francisco office of the FIS via a leased General Electric's transmitter to the Philippines in English. Other languages followed. So this media agency kicked off in 1942, and this was the media agency that was responsible for telling the rest of the world what the government wanted the rest of the world to think was happening in the news media, or in the wartime like events, like so like the official stories were pumped out by this media agency back in 1942 during World War II. So what happened was, once this media agency got so big after World War II, they didn't really have to fight, and the wars didn't have to fight anymore in the battlefield. The wars were fought over the media, because now they realized the power of the war wasn't in the actual battlefields. It was in the words that were used to explain what was supposedly happening in the battlefields. So just like you can say the history is written by the conquerors or the winners, that's actually where the power is. So it's once you realize that you can manipulate masses of people with words better than you can manipulate masses of people with brute strength. That was like World War II. That was when World War II shifted into the next gear, which was the World War III, which was the war for your consciousness. So that's in World War II. That's when, on a collective scale, like across this whole experience of all these individuals here, that's when that Western so-called civilization, the New World, went to war and then convinced the rest of the world that they were no longer at war with the media. And this goes hand in hand with the same kind of tactic that was used when I was saying before about our responsibility to the forward generations, the 7 generations ahead of us, along with, so I was going to tie in all these other things at the same time. So our responsibilities to the next 7 generations, along with the things that are happening right now. So this is like the micro and the macro. We have the micro of, okay, well, obviously if you got a family and you're doing what you got to do, that's first and foremost. But also included in that is the way this realm is going to interact with your future generations. From this moment will determine what your grandchildren, your children, your grandchildren, great-grandchildren will be interacting with. So these world wars that have been started in 1 and 2, the end of the brute strength war, moving into the next, shifting gears into the consciousness. Why we haven't had a World War III is because the World War III was started covertly. It was the war for your mind, because once you go to war, that's it on a world scale. That's it. Like, that's like how many more world wars are you gonna have? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Like, what's gonna happen? They realized that after the second one, like, people aren't gonna fall for this shit again. It's just gonna, yeah, like what? So what happened was, you had this idea of world peace, but it wasn't world peace. It was a Cold War that was marketed as world peace. So this goes back to, like I was saying, the war on our people. There was never any peace waged. There was only a shift of attention, a shift of perspective that was only on our end, thinking that things were changing on their end, but they never changed. We were just told that they changed. The same way we were told that, you know, we're not at war anymore. Why? Because the media was designed to tell you that. The same way that, you know, any of these wars are for thinking that, you know, any of these wars are like any of your politicians are real people in a sense of on a macro scale. Are they obviously on a micro scale? Are they real? Whatever, you know, you can say, yeah, but on a macro scale, these people are holographic images that represent an identity that's connected to a consciousness that has been theorized into reality. So these empty, substanceless, mainstream, Western-minded beings, entities of sorts, are now manipulating the everyday reality, the consciousness of the individual, along with the consciousness, through the consciousness of the macro, from spaces like this, anchoring, you know, decades and even centuries before now. So this is why it's so important to go into like what has happened up until now, including the psychologies that had led up to now. This is why I focus so much on bringing this to the surface, because you can't step forward if you got two broken legs. Don't, for starters. You know, people that as a mass, as a whole, people are just like, oh, we should just move forward. We're all one and we're all unified. It's a new age. The awakening is here. We're all enlightened and everything is awesome. And we all know that we know the truth now. The earth is flat. And so what? These are all things that are cool and, you know, whatever. But, excuse me, they're not really connected to anything. It's not like any. So anyway, we had World War II, Cold War. So went from World War II into the Cold War. And the Cold War, and this might be, you know, the media with involved with what was that? NASA and let's see if any NASA stuff is in here. A lot of flat earthers be interested in this. So next few years, government debated the role of Voice of America. So over the next few years, the U.S. government debated the best role of the Voice of America. Oh, okay. So what should this propaganda machine, what should it be doing? The decision was made to use VOA broadcasts as a part of its foreign policy to fight the propaganda of the Soviet Union and other countries. How would they use media, the VOA? How would they use that to fight the propaganda of the Soviet Union? So what was the propaganda of the Soviet Union? Well, they was talking shit about us. So what did the United States do? They just talk shit about them. So the VOA, or the other war, the Cold War, is basically the shit-talking media agency for the government. So let's see if there's any NASA stuff in here. American Jazz, Cold War, sponsored jamming of VOA broadcasts. I'm just not even really reading this. Russia. Okay, throughout the 60s and 70s, VOA covered some of the era's most important news, including Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, Neil Armstrong's, there it is, first walk on the moon. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, VOA broadcast around the clock in Spanish. So, you can see, this is the war, post-Cold War. Clinton administration advised cutting funding for Radio Free Europe, blah, blah, blah. Cuts in services. The Arabic service was abolished in 2002. All right. And all of them been cut down. Hold on, let's see. 2004, merged the VOA WorldNet. So let's look at WorldNet next. WorldNet was merged in a satellite television service, merged into VOA. Click on that in a second. Russia ended. 53 years. Ukrainian, Serbian, Macedonian, Bosnian also ended. 2010. Started broadcast in Sudan. Provide people with free information. This is free. It's free. It's all for your benefit. In 2013, VOA finished foreign language transmission on shortwave and medium wave to Albania, Georgia, Iran, and Latin America, as well as English language broadcasts to the Middle East and Afghanistan. The movement was done due to budget cuts. Okay. Shortwave, let's see. I guess that's it. See the director, see if anybody recognizes anybody. (2016) till now, it's still rolling. So this agency's got a YouTube channel and everything. So anyway, point being is that the same way the government has a news channel, like I didn't even know about this. I thought that, the mainstream media was the government's news channel. But no, they have an actual official news channel that's been running since World War II. And this is it, Voice of America. So this is the point. The same way you can understand that the government has media agencies designed to tell the entire world a particular story, like American propaganda or like Western American, like the colonial American storyline. That machine is pumping out like waves of information to the entire world. It has been doing that since 1942. So you can understand, well, what kind of information would they be saying? Well, the information that you just saw in that Donald Trump thing, like them scaring the shit out of you by talking to you and just saying, hey, there was a shooting in the synagogue. Hey, guys, there was a shooting over there. You listening? Okay, I'm important. I got a big fancy tie and suit on, and I'm in a big fancy area, and a lot of people are talking about this. Okay, here's my shot. I'm going to do it, and I'm not going to mess up. There was a shooting in a synagogue, and I feel very bad. Like I should look like I feel very bad, but my main purpose is to just tell you guys that, hey, this was a hate crime. Okay, have a nice day. That's a propaganda machine. It has a purpose. It has a particular intention. So let me go back to what was I saying? Lost my train of thought on that one. Oh, so anyway, you can see how that's what it was. You can see how simple and just like propagandish that is, to just have that, puppeteer, that puppet character of Donald Trump go out there and say something so stupid. Like, you obviously know he doesn't give a shit about. You can see that he doesn't give a shit about anything. It seems like just some kind of storyline, some fake ass storyline that is just being used to tell people about hate crimes, to make more attention on hate crimes. That's the intention of all this shit. So if that's happening, and you know that, then how is that happening in other ways? And what's that also connected to? So all the other videos that I've been doing in the recent months have been explaining to people how it's not just only telling you, to be angry about, whatever they're trying to be angry at, like focus on their role. It's also making you focus, think about other people and certain people in a certain way. particularly the people who were the original caretakers of this land, the land that the people who created all these media agencies were designing those media agencies to distract you from, to demonize the original people so that they can be put on a pedestal over the original people. So how many other ways would they do that? Well, they would not only use the voice of America, which was used to convince foreign people, they would also use the mainstream media, Hollywood, the education system, and also things like Jim Crow laws. So this is the thing. The Voice of America back in 1942, starting there, is going to have remnants of a whole bunch of people who are still like the grandkids and even the children of people who are still like missing the Jim Crow era. Like people who think that the Jim Crow era were the good old days. Those people, there's still some people out there. And for people who don't know about the Jim Crow laws and all that other stuff, this was just something that I was randomly going to do a little video about the Jim Crow, like how Jim Crow, anyway, I wasn't going to go too deep into it, but it's a whole set of, it's a whole psychology, the whole Jim Crow psychology. It's not laws. Back in the day, they were called the Black Codes. So they were just called Jim Crow just to kind of desensitize it, to lighten it up, because Jim Crow was actually the name of a character, of a blackface character that, this is that character. This is the character of Jim Crow, who is just like a dancing puppeteer. But the actual storyline is based upon a psychology of laws that were designed to affect the people, the now free men, the free, so-called free people after the abolition of slavery, the abolishment of slavery. So this was to keep so-called white people in power, or the same design when they created the headright system and the Homestead Act and the redlining program. And it's some people in the comment section of the last video, they're talking about like there's always distraction from the Jew, like distraction from all these storylines and focused on the Jews. Like, I'm not saying that the Jews aren't involved in and possibly involved in the origins of a lot of this stuff. What I'm saying is that is a definite scapegoat. The whole Jew hashtag that has been being a hashtag since the World War time frame. So that whole hashtag, it's a government design. It's a government thing that's designed to have a particular effect on you. And what I'm saying is that they were definitely involved in all this shit that's going on. What I'm saying is that if that line just keeps being repeated, we're going to miss out on the deeper programs because they're just characters. They're just one piece on the board. I'm talking about the actual board. So this board includes, yes, obviously the Jews and their involvement in all of the slavery laws and all this other stuff that's going on. But also the bigger picture in my eyes is actually the groundwork, like the groundwork of this, of all these segregation laws, like Jim Crow laws. The groundwork was carried out by both Jewish people and so-called white people. This is why white supremacy is white supremacy. It's called white supremacy because the people who are part of that so-called identity of whiteness, were privileged in some kind of way. That's what I'm saying. And they went through that. They carried it out. So they got something back. And this is all government sponsored. So this whole thing, these actions, the actual actions were carried out by both so-called Jewish people who are not the real Jews and so-called white people. So let's just put this on the board right now. Equivalent or not, the Jews to the whites in reference to what's been going on, they're not it's not a matter of comparing who did what and all this other stuff. No, they both did some fucked up shit. They both are going to be accountable for what has been happening up until these moments right now. So let everybody else who's talking about the Jews, let them talk about the Jews. I'm not saying the Jews they ain't done anything. I'm saying they very well have. What I'm saying is that there is not enough attention on the actual government sponsored laws and the racism, white supremacy within those laws. That is there's not enough focus on the stuff that could be acknowledged and worked on that deals with the people in house right now, like the White House, the system of RWS in the education system, in the media. It's not they're not saying anything. The black codes were meant to keep a certain people up and a certain people down. The black codes were called black codes because you keep black people at this code and you keep white people at this code. Those laws may have been invented by a whole bunch of other people who are very intelligent as far as manipulating people, but they were acted out, carried out, taught to the descendants of the children of the people in this land now, the majority, so-called white. What is that? That's what I'm saying. It's an imagination. What I'm saying is that in that imagination, in that illusion of something, there have been a lot of people that have lived and died because of those illusions that has still to this day have not been accounted for. So the Jim Crow laws, aka the black codes, are laws that still affect us today. They still live in the world today. They live both by keeping other people down and by also keeping other people up. This stuff has not been acknowledged before we can even understand what that stuff is, because it's a psychology, it's a disease, it's a parasite. Before we can even go into there, you have people jumping on what you're saying, don't look at that, don't say that, that doesn't exist. This is what you need to be looking at. No, just because so-called Jews were involved in some fucked up shit does not take away from the responsibility of so-called white people's it doesn't take away from the responsibility of so-called white people involved in all the shit that went down. That's a whole nother book, a whole nother chapter that's still in the same series. You focus and you do what you're doing on your series and all other stuff, and they do intertwine. But for the most part, there are not too many channels on here. Look at it this way. How many videos or how many YouTube channels are, disassembling all the information about what the so-called Jews did? It's a whole bunch, right? Whole bunch. You can't even count them. Like, it's basically every channel. You even got Owen Benjamin, celebrities, and all these people talking about that. It's a thing. Even Louis Black, like his whole shtick. His whole stand-up comedy is about being a Jew. His whole character, it's a fucking joke. It's a joke out there. So if it's a joke and it's being used by the government and it's being used by the truther community and Hollywood and the news agencies and all that other stuff, then you have to understand that it's deeper than that. And it's also being used to distract you from something else. So, if that's the case, what is that something else? Well, obviously that something else is, look at the character. So if they're making certain people look bad, look at who they're trying to make good and who they're trying to distract from. You can't say anything about white people. You will have, they have every single distraction. They have every single thing out there to distract from the accountability of so-called white people. What I'm saying is that, first of all, let's start dealing with the idea of whiteness, because the idea and the acceptance of whiteness is something that exists and kind of like presupposes like this it's a stain in the society that every time, somebody white, that's a culture. They believe in that culture. It exists even in the persona, like even the identity. The term white, like when a white person walks up to it, like traditionally, a white man walks up to a black man, or even like it's even more emphasized in like a younger black man. They have this sense of I almost said ownership, but it is like enslaved, but it's mostly like what is it? What is the feeling? It's like they have this sense of authority. Like you're dumb. Like you're not equipped. Like they have this. There's an identity surrounding whiteness, a white woman and a white man, and that same identity exists for all other people in this nation. But the whiteness is held in another world. It's like another thing. It's like up on this pedestal. Like only the leaders, only the superheroes, only the Hollywood actors, only the richest people, the most influential people, the scientists, like all of them are white. Like it's this big wonderful thing. Like it's this it's an identity. So it's that same identity is the same identity of the identity that the government thinks they're putting out with the Voice of America. So that's what I'm saying, is that you have so-called white truthers out there claiming to be truthers, yet they still call themselves the biggest lie in the whole world. That biggest lie in the whole world is existing not only in the individuals, but it's existing inside the intellect of society, of the whole world. And it's a way of thinking. So like I said, it's a character, it's an identity, but it's also a way of thinking. It includes emotions. It includes things you can talk about and things you shouldn't talk about. So the things you can talk about are pumped out through the laughter and the comedy and the drama and the romance of all of Hollywood and all of politics and all that other stuff. And the things you can't talk about are like the taboo stuff. So the things you can't talk about are things that make so-called white people uncomfortable. You can't talk about that. If you talk about that, then it's like talking bad about the president. The same reason you can't talk about so-called white people in the Western civilization, so-called civilization. This is what I'm saying. I'm not talking about white people. I'm talking about the identity that has been protected by the government, which is the superpower around the world that created things like redlining, the Homestead Act, and the head right system that were specifically designed to affect masses of people based upon race and so-called colors, so black and white. They were moving people around based upon their colors. So this is what I'm saying. This is a direct key into disassembling the authority of the system, revisiting the mind controls and disassembling the mind controls that have been created to create the power. This is why I'm focusing on the system of RWS and this whole black-white thing, is to disassemble the psychologies and the belief systems that created the power. And right now, when you have so-called truthers who are defending the psychologies that created the power, you can't even get off you can't get one word in, and you can't get off the ground. You can't catch any tread. You can't move anywhere, because constantly people are just being happy with nothing. They're happy with not moving. They're just talking about something. That's it. They're just talking about movement instead of actually consciously and like intellectually and like in a healthy way, in a healthy manner, movement. It's just a bunch of, talk. That's why I said, like, saying, naming another bad guy like the Jews, that obviously, I mean, that's an obvious sort of thing. Like, how many times do we have to say that over and over and over again? You know, I'm starting to think that I'm not starting to think. I know that there's people out there to distract. There's paid people out there to distract. You know that there's so many people out there. But like I said, like this shit is very complex. You know, like on a little YouTube channel like this, there's so many things to talk about. And I've talked about a lot of these things, including that whole scapegoat scenario, is not to distract or deflect from any of the work that has been done by the so-called Jewish people. It's only to emphasize the equivalency, the groups that are equivalent. Are so-called white people at least equivalent in engaging in society against the people who are going against the colonial system and have been for centuries? Are the Jews the only one? Of course not. Who's at least equivalent? So-called white people, the people who are now profiting from the identity that was created behind the power grid. So this Voice of America is a media agency that is basically the voice of white supremacy, racism, white supremacy. And like I said, it's the government agency media. And another example before I close this out is, so this is the media's version of this psychological mind control. Then you have the media version, the media. So that was government media is the Voice of America. Now you have the media, which is like National Geographic and Discovery Channel and all that shit. So you have National Geographic telling you what the government wants you to know, the same way Voice of America tells you what the government wants you to know. They just do it in a different way. So in this story, this is an article called "Who Was Jim Crow?" And you can see, I just found this interesting because this is a perfect example of like the mainstream deflection, distraction, and that whole storyline, and giving you this shallow interpretation of what's going on, all just to keep you from going any further than that. So this is what National Geographic / the government is telling you is who Jim Crow was. And I'll go through the whole article so you can know what I'm talking about. So the depths of Jim Crow, the whole like who was Jim Crow, is mostly about like even this image right here. This is what you really should focus on. Jim Crow, who's in that coffin? Who's in that coffin? Is it really about the body of the person that's in that coffin? Or is it about what Jim Crow, the psychology, represents? Jim Crow, the legislature, represents. Jim Crow, the actions represent. The actions of people, particular people. Okay, so it's actually the essence, the character, the substance of the individual. It ain't got shit to do with the actual body, right? So the story, this is these men walking down the street with that. They're not walking down to show you the body of a person. They're walking down the street to explain a deeper, like to explain an idea, to talk about an idea, something that has a reality that is deeper than a person or whatever it is. Anyway, you see what I mean. So this starts out with 50 years ago, the Voting Rights Act targeted laws and practices of Jim Crow. So that's how they start, by putting themselves out there as a fighting against. So the government, this is the beginning of it. Underneath the picture of men carry the coffin of Jim Crow through the streets to protest racial discrimination in 1944. Is that what it was? Racial discrimination? Okay. Let's give him that at least. Okay, for starters. All right. And then what's the beginning of? 50 years ago, the Voting Rights Act targeted Voting Rights Act. So this is a very slick way of manipulating you to get into a space of separating the government from Jim Crow. You see that? The Voting Rights Act targeted, so it's attacking Jim Crow. It's not part of Jim Crow. It has nothing to do with Jim Crow. Like, it's over. Jim Crow's over there, and the Voting Rights Act is over here with the people, the good Americans. Okay, just so you know that. So that's subconsciously where they're programming people to be before they even read this article, to be in that space. Here's where the name came from. So this is what the actual article is about, supposedly to them. 1944, Detroit chapter, blah, 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 buried him. So they say 1963. So they're talking about, in the first paragraph, they're talking about the symbolic burying of Jim Crow. Second paragraph says, 50 years ago this Thursday, President Lyndon B. Johnson tried to bury Jim Crow by signing the Voting Rights Act of 1965 into law. Okay, so that's like the first sentence, the paragraph for the first sentence of setting up the government, as separate from Jim Crow. Then you have the next paragraph. Today we still use Jim Crow to describe that system of segregation and discrimination in the South, but the system's namesake isn't actually Southern. Jim Crow came from the North. So that's as far, listen to this, that's as far as National Geographic will go into what Jim Crow was about. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and what was pictured in the newspapers. They will never go into the psychology, the intelligence of what Jim Crow is and was and still is. They will never go into that. This is the design of National Geographic. This is what I'm saying. This is the same design of National Geographic. It's the same design of the mainstream media and the same design as that Voice of America thing. See, the Voice of America is just a government, an actual out in the open government media group, but it says the same thing as CNN, MSNBC, and Fox. They're doing the same thing, and they've been doing it for a lot longer, actually. So what I'm saying is that National Geographic is also a version of Voice of America, the mainstream media. People already know this, but this is just another breakdown of it. Same thing with all your YouTube versions and anybody else on YouTube who's sharing the same distractive information. They're doing the same thing. So I just wanted to share this what is this? This other example, because you can see they just distracted. So now look, think of this if this was like a little 12-year-old boy, right? Or whoever, 12-year-old kid, whether a boy or girl, it don't matter. Going to read this, they're like, hear something about Jim Crow in school, and then they go home and Google it. They're like, what is Jim Crow? Oh, I like National Geographic. I got a bunch of books of those, the magazines that my parents had or grandparents had by now, they have a YouTube channel, and they're still on TV. I trust National Geographic. What was Jim Crow? Oh, okay. What was Jim Crow? Jim Crow was just like it was just about people being racist. That's it. People dressed like, this is a white man dressing up in blackface, and Jim Crow. The voting rights was created by our government to end all of that. So it's all over now. It was just white people behaving badly. That was it. And it stopped because of the Voting Rights Act. That's what a little kid is going to do when they read this. They're going to say, "Oh, well, at least we aren't bad anymore. At least we don't dress in blackface anymore." And that's where the psychology of the problem. So the problem is going to stop. Because the kid trusts National Geographic. They trust the Voice of America. They trust the government. They trust the Discovery Channel. They trust their teachers. And if their teachers are telling their kids, like, Jim Crow was only about people just behaving badly, specifically white people, because, you know, it was worse back then. That's it. That's as far as they want to go. It's worse back then. The same thing, the same way they say, like, oh, well, you're a human. The same way you say, oh, I love you. And they're like, what does that mean? There's nothing there. There's just these words. The same way there's just these theories of everything. The theory, and literally, so what is that? Stephen Hawking, he says the same. That's his book or his everything. Like, he says the theory of everything. Einstein, the Big Bang, the heliocentrism, all of that. These so-called white people with the system of racism, white supremacy, are telling the world that they have the theories for everything, including you. So when Joe Rogan had who and what you are. So when Joe Rogan has Graham Hancock on his channel, telling you that they're mapping out the DMT universe, and they're saying they also know that everything's of you. They know that everything's about this reality, and you don't know shit. So to just keep pushing the dialogue, keep pushing the story along, and as the story gets pushed along, all the other stories get brushed under the rug, and the other stories get forgotten and missed and rewritten. They get told in the way that the system wants them to be told. So the National Geographic doesn't want you to know about the psychology of Jim Crow. It doesn't want you to know about the government's involvement in Jim Crow. It won't tell you about redlining. It won't tell you about the Homestead Act. It won't tell you about the head rice system. It won't tell you about any of the shit involving Jim Crow and how that stuff affects people today. It will only talk about the puppet, the show, what they want you to be distracted by. See, Jim Crow is a symbol, and that symbol was buried ceremonially in this event right here. But is the psychology and the separation of the spirituality that led up to Jim Crow laws, is that symbolism being spoken on in this article? No. What did so-called white people do with this in National Geographic? They slickly, took the whole article and these three tiny little paragraphs in one sentence were focused on not even the symbolism of Jim Crow, but focused on the government-sponsored story of Jim Crow, talking about how government is separate from Jim Crow. The rest of the whole fucking article is about the Jim Crow character. That was the blackface character that you're looking at there, going into the theater. And now it starts talking about the discrimination stuff. So these laws. So here are the laws. But it's still about the character. And that's it. Doesn't even talk. Where is it? Don't freeze up on me. Okay. After the Civil War, states passed laws discriminated against newly freed Americans as early as 1890s. These laws gained nickname. In 1899, North Carolina's Goldsboro Daily Argus published an article. Who cares? I lost my train. Where is it? Published an article subtitled "How Captain Tilley of the ANC Road Enforces the Jim Crow Law." Railroad. Don't really know the racist performance in the North came to represent racist laws and policies in the South, but they can speculate. So it's not about the. See, this is what it is. The history And the actions of these individuals in our recent past is just accepted as normal behavior. This is what's going on in the system of racism, white supremacy, and all of the systems in and around racism, white supremacy. All of this is accepted as normal behavior. This is what Joe Rogan is out there to promote with his monkey-minded evolution. We're all animals, so we just conquer and destroy and just fuck everything, and then everybody is just these evolved animals. So Jim Crow, like when you this is when you believe that consciously and subconsciously, then you can be okay with all of your mainstream celebrities not ever addressing that, not ever talking about it. It's not even at all a thing that you need to be paying attention to. It's a made up. And if anybody talks about something other than that, then like if they address it directly, then something's wrong with them. And you need to attack them because they're attacking you. Because they're talking about your belief system. So this is why, like, when National Geographic downplays flat Earth, when Discovery Channel and all these other little YouTubes downplay flat Earth, a whole bunch of people don't even talk about it. So conversely, when the flat earthers downplay racism, white supremacy, guess what happens? Nobody talks about it. And then the story just keeps going on and on and on and on. So so-called flat earthers doing the same thing. They think they're up against something else. So I'll leave it there. My battery's dying. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for the support. And until next time, from all my relations, peace, love, and harmony.